The moment my wife set that envelope on the kitchen table and slid it toward me, I knew. Not because she said anything, not because she was crying. She wasn't. She was standing there in her good blazer, the navy one she wore to office parties, and she looked completely calm. That was the thing that broke something in me. Not her words, not even the papers inside that envelope. Just how calm she looked. I picked it up. Divorce petition. I read the first paragraph twice before the words actually meant anything. "Diana," I said, "sit down and talk to me." She pulled out the chair across from me, but she didn't sit all the way back in it. She sat on the edge, like she was ready to leave at any moment. 18 years of marriage, and she sat on the edge of the chair. "I think it's all pretty clear in the paperwork," she said. "I don't want to read paperwork. I want to hear it from you." She looked out the window at the driveway. My truck was parked next to her car. I'd driven home from the hangar 40 minutes ago, still in my work shirt with the patch on the sleeve. Marcus Webb, Senior Aviation Maintenance Technician. The same patch she used to touch with her thumb when she straightened my collar before her family dinners. "I'm not happy, Marcus," she said. "I haven't been for a long time." "Then why didn't you tell me?" "I tried." "You didn't hear it?" "I thought about that. I thought hard. I don't remember a single conversation where you said you were unhappy." "That's exactly what I mean." I set the envelope down. "Is there someone else?" She didn't answer right away. She moved her hands into her lap and studied them like they were something interesting. "Yes," she said. I nodded slowly. "Who?" "His name is Nathan Cole. He runs a tech company. They just closed a Series B round. It was in the business section last month if you'd been reading it." I hadn't been reading the business section. I'd been reading FAA maintenance bulletins and torque specs for turbine fasteners. Different kind of reading. "How long?" 4 months. "Were we still?" "Yes," she said quietly. "We were." I looked at the papers again. She had already filled in her attorney's information. She had a timeline. She wanted the house listed within 60 days. She was willing to let me keep my truck and my tools. She was very organized about the whole thing. "I'm not going to fight you," I said. She looked up then, like she hadn't expected that. "I'm not going to beg, Diana. If this is what you want, sign it and we're done." She stood up and said she was staying at her sister's place and that she'd come back for her things over the weekend. She picked up her keys from the counter. At the door, she stopped. "You're a good man, Marcus. This isn't about that." "I know," I said. "It never is." She left. I sat at that table for probably an hour. The kitchen was quiet in a way it had never been before, like even the house knew something had changed permanently. Our son Tyler was a sophomore at the University of Tennessee. I called him that night. I kept it simple. "Your mom and I are separating. It's not your fault. Nothing changes for you." He asked if I was okay. I told him I would be. He said he was coming home that weekend, and I told him he didn't have to, and he said he knew he didn't have to, and he said he knew he didn't have to. He was coming anyway. Good kid, always was. I took a week off work. My supervisor, Carter, didn't ask questions. He'd known me long enough to read a face. The house was too big suddenly. We'd bought it when Tyler was in middle school because Diana wanted the good school district and the double garage and the back deck for entertaining. I'd put in 10,000 hours of overtime at the hangar to make those mortgage payments comfortable. I'd never said a word about it because I didn't mind. I genuinely didn't mind. I liked the work. I liked that I was good at it. Diana had called me just a mechanic once, not to me. To her colleague at one of those work parties she dragged me to. The colleague asked what I did, and Diana said, "Oh, Marcus works on planes. He's basically a mechanic." Then she laughed and moved the conversation somewhere else. I'd been standing 6 feet away with a drink in my hand. She didn't know I heard. I thought about that moment a lot in those first few days. I'm a licensed airframe and power plant technician with an inspection authorization. I sign off on aircraft that carry hundreds of people. I hold a patent. I have held a patent for the last 3 years. It's a secondary turbine seal inspection tool I designed in my garage on weekends because the existing tools were clumsy and time-consuming. My former boss, Jim Hargrove, sent it to an aerospace equipment company called Vontech Systems, and they had been slowly moving toward a licensing deal. It had been in progress for about 8 months. Diana knew about the patent. She did not know about Vontech. I never mentioned Vontech because I'd learned a long time ago not to mention things until they were real. Diana liked real things. Promises and maybes made her impatient. Anyway, I had other things to figure out. I drove out to my property that first week. I own 12 acres outside of town. I bought it 6 years ago when a stretch of land along Creek Road was being broken up and sold cheap. Diana thought it was a waste of money, said I was collecting land like I collected socket sets. She wasn't wrong about the socket sets, but she was wrong about the land. It was beautiful country, just past the ridge, with a clear stream running the back edge of it. I'd camped out there with Tyler twice. I thought about building something on it someday. I hadn't done anything with it yet. It just sat there, appreciated, and I let it. I drove out and walked the perimeter the way I sometimes did when I needed to think. The grass was coming in from the spring rains. A red-tailed hawk was working the thermals over the ridge. I stood at the high corner of the property, and I breathed. My neighbor Tom Aldrich pulled up in his truck while I was walking back to my own. He farmed the 40 acres adjacent, and he was a decent man who minded his business but waved every time he saw you. "Haven't seen you out here in a while," he said. "Taken some time." He nodded. "You know, there's been a fellow coming around asking about this stretch of Creek Road property." "What kind of fellow?" "Young. Nice car. One of those big black SUVs. Left a card in my mailbox." Tom reached into his shirt pocket and produced a business card. "Cole something. Tech company out of Nashville." I took the card. Nathan Cole, Nova Build Ventures. I read it twice. I kept my face completely flat. "He talking about buying?" I asked. "Said he's working on some kind of development. Wants to put in one of those tech campus things. Green building, solar panels, the whole bit. Word is he needs about 6 parcels along the Creek Road corridor to make it work. He's already got 3 of them under option." I looked down at the card again. The property I was standing on was parcel 5 on the Creek Road corridor. I knew this because I had researched it exhaustively when I bought it. "Appreciate you telling me," I said. Tom waved and drove back down the gravel track to his own place. I stood there in the quiet holding Nathan Cole's business card and listening to the stream. Tyler came home that weekend like he said he would. He was a quieter version of himself, watchful, checking on me more than teenagers usually bother to check on their fathers. We ate barbecue and watched baseball, and he helped me reorganize the garage without me asking. On Sunday morning over coffee, he said, "Is this about Nathan Cole?" I looked at him. "Mom mentioned his name," Tyler said carefully. "Did she say anything else?" "She said he's kind of a big deal." I thought about Nathan Cole standing on Tom Aldrich's property in his nice SUV, working the Creek Road corridor parcel by parcel, building something on someone else's foundation. "He might be," I said. Tyler looked at me over his coffee mug. "You're not upset. I'm working through it. You got that look." "What look?" "The one you get when you're fixing something." He paused. "Just don't do anything dumb, Dad." "Have I ever done anything dumb?" He thought about it genuinely. "No," he admitted. "Not once. It's actually kind of weird." We laughed and left it there. The weeks that followed were strange but not unbearable. I settled into a rhythm. Up early, drive to the hangar, work through my inspection schedule, come home, eat something, read. I started following Nova Build Ventures in the local business press. Nathan Cole had done 3 of these developments in mid-sized southern cities. He had backers, a consortium of impact investment funds that liked the optics of tech campuses and underserved rural corridors. The Creek Road project was the biggest thing he'd attempted. He needed all 6 parcels. The timeline was tight because his funding commitments had an 18-month window. I also got a call from Jim Hargrove at Vontech Systems. They wanted to move the licensing deal forward. They'd done their analysis, and the tool had real commercial potential, not just for aviation, for industrial turbine maintenance across multiple sectors. They were looking at a structure that would give me an upfront payment plus royalties. Jim said the number out loud, and I had to set the phone down for a moment. When I picked it back up, I said, "Jim, I need a few weeks before I sign anything." He asked if there was a problem. I said no, just some personal matters to organize. He said take the time. I drove out to Creek Road and walked my 12 acres again, this time with purpose. I photographed every corner marker. I pulled the deed from my files and read it front to back. Parcel 5, Creek Road Corridor, registered in my name only. Diana had never been on this deed. She had no claim to it in the divorce because we had agreed on a clean split. She got the house equity. I kept my property, retirement, and tools. Her attorney had never asked about the land specifically because neither of us had listed it as a significant marital asset. In the original settlement discussion, Diana's attorney had focused on the house. I contacted my own attorney, a calm woman named Patricia, who had been practicing family law in this county for 20 years. I told her about the parcel. She confirmed what I suspected. It was mine. Clean, no question. Then I called a man named Robert Hensley. Robert was the executive director of the Creek Valley Land Conservancy, a small nonprofit that had been trying for years to preserve the riparian corridor along the creek from commercial development. The Conservancy had been losing ground, parcel by parcel, to developers. I'd read about them in the county paper 2 years ago and thought idly that it was a shame. I told Robert I wanted to talk about a conservation easement on my 12 acres along the creek. A conservation easement. Not a sale, not a full donation, but a legal restriction on the land that would prevent it from ever being subdivided or commercially developed. My ownership would stay intact. I could still walk it, camp on it, pass it to Tyler, but no one could ever build a tech campus on it. Robert was very quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mr. Webb, do you understand what your parcel represents in the Creek Road corridor?" "I do," I said. "NovaBuild has been acquiring options up and down that stretch. Without your parcel, they cannot assemble the contiguous land they need for the campus. Their architectural plans require it." "I understand." Another pause. "Can I ask what prompted this?" "I just want the creek protected," I said. That was true. It was also incomplete, but it was true. Robert said the Conservancy would cover all legal costs and file the easement within 30 days. The process was straightforward. I signed the paperwork on a Thursday morning and had lunch at a diner on the way back and ate a patty melt and felt, for the first time in 2 months, entirely like myself. The Van Tech deal closed the following week. I won't say the number here. I will say that I sat in Patricia's conference room and signed my name, and afterward Patricia said, "Marcus, you should think about sitting down with a financial advisor." I told her I already had one. She looked surprised. I'd been working with a fee-only advisor named Gerald for 4 years. Gerald was deeply unsurprised by any of this. Gerald said, "Offshore account or domestic trust?" I said domestic trust, and we built it from there. Tyler called me that same week. His voice was different, lighter, kind of bouncing. "Dad, have you heard about NovaBuild?" "What about them?" "They're in the news. They had some kind of major setback with a project in Tennessee. Backers pulled out. The CEO issued a statement." "Is that right?" "Dad." A pause. "Did you have something to do with this?" "I put a conservation easement on my Creek Road property." Long silence. "Then, when?" "Few weeks ago." "Before or after you found out who Mom was seeing?" "Does it matter?" "It matters because if it was after, that's the most dad thing you have ever done in your entire life." I was quiet for a moment. "The creek needed protecting, Tyler." "Oh my God," he said. He was laughing now. "You are unbelievable." I smiled into the phone. "You said not to do anything dumb. This is the opposite of dumb. This is, I don't even have a word for this. Conservation-minded." He laughed for a long time. I let him. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in early October. I drove myself to the courthouse. I wore a clean shirt. Patricia walked me through the final signatures, and we were done in 20 minutes. Diana wasn't there. Her attorney handled it. I drove home, changed into my work clothes, and went to the hangar for the afternoon shift. Carter raised an eyebrow when I came in. I told him I'd just finalized my divorce. He said he was sorry. I said, "Don't be." And I meant it. The newspaper ran a piece on the NovaBuild collapse 3 weeks later. The reporter had done good work. She'd traced the funding structure, the timeline, the way the land assembly had fallen apart when the Creek Road corridor couldn't be completed. Nathan Cole was quoted saying the project faced unforeseen environmental and regulatory obstacles. The Conservancy got a mention near the bottom of the piece as a stakeholder in the corridor. My name wasn't in it anywhere. I cut it out and put it in my workbench drawer. Not as a trophy, more like a bookmark. Around that time, I got an unexpected call from a woman named Sasha Merritt. She worked for an aviation trade publication out of Atlanta. The kind of serious industry journal that gets read by engineers and procurement officers, not the general public. She'd heard about the Van Tech licensing deal through Jim Hargrove and wanted to do a feature on the tool and the design process. I said I'd think about it. I did think about it. I called Jim and asked whether the publicity would help or hurt the licensing rollout. He said it would help. I called Sasha back and said yes. She drove up to the hangar on a Thursday with a photographer and a recorder. She was professional and direct and asked better questions than I expected. We spent an hour in the maintenance bay and another hour in the conference room. She asked about the design process, about the years of development, about what it felt like to hold a physical tool you'd built from scratch in your garage. Honestly, I said, it felt like proof. Proof of what? I thought about that for a moment. That the work was always worth doing, even when nobody was watching. She wrote that down. The article ran 6 weeks later. Tyler called and read me portions of it over the phone, slightly dramatically. He'd screenshot it and sent it to approximately everyone he knew, apparently. Carter put a copy on the break room bulletin board at the hangar. Jim sent a congratulatory email. The strangest call came 2 days after the article ran. It was Diana. I hadn't spoken to her since the kitchen table in March. Her voice sounded like she was choosing her words from a list. "I read the article," she said. "Okay. I didn't know about Von Tech." "I know." "Marcus, how long has that been in progress?" "About a year. Closing took a while." Silence. "Why didn't you ever mention it?" "You never asked about the patent work." More silence. I waited. "Nathan's project fell through," she said eventually. Things are complicated right now." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. I kept my voice neutral, and I meant it. I genuinely did not want Diana to suffer. I just didn't want her in my life anymore, which was a different thing. "I'm staying at my sister's still," she said. "I know." "Are you—" She stopped. "Are you seeing anyone, Diana?" "I know." "I'm sorry. That's not why I called." "Why did you call?" Another pause. I think I wanted to say that I was wrong about some things. About the way I thought about you, what you were. I leaned against the kitchen counter. The house was mine now, the equity split done, and I had done very little to it except take down the photos I didn't like and put up one photo of Tyler and me at a Tennessee game 3 years ago. It looked more like me in here now. "I appreciate that, Diana," I said. "Are you happy?" I thought about that honestly. "I'm getting there," I said. "I think I will be." We said goodbye without awkwardness. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a minute with the quiet, and the quiet was okay. It was a different quiet than that first night. This one had some air in it. Tyler drove down from Knoxville the weekend before Christmas. He brought his girlfriend, a biology major named Priya, who shook my hand like she meant it, and immediately started asking intelligent questions about turbine maintenance. I liked her immediately. We drove out to Creek Road in the truck. The three of us. Tyler had never actually walked the property with me, and I wanted to show him the eastern corner where the stream widened before it bent south. We walked the fence line in the cold air, the dry grass crunching underfoot. Priya pointed out a great blue heron standing in the shallow water at the bend like it was posing for something. "You're leaving this to me?" Tyler said. "Eventually," I said. "When I'm done with it." "When will that be?" "Hopefully not for a long time." He looked out across the 12 acres. The sky was the flat gray of December, and the trees were bare, and the creek was high from recent rain, moving quick and silver over the rocks. It was not dramatic-looking land. It wasn't a ranch or a resort. It was just good, quiet land with a creek running through it. The creek needed protecting, Tyler said, mocking me gently. It did. He bumped my shoulder with his. Priya was crouching down near the water, looking at something in the sediment. Tyler watched her for a moment and then looked back at the land. "Dad," he said quietly. "For real, I'm proud of you." I put my hand on his shoulder for a second. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We walked back to the truck in the cold. The heron was still there at the bend when I turned to look one more time, standing in the current like it had been there forever and intended to stay. On the drive back into town, Priya asked me what I planned to do with the Von Tech royalties long term. And we talked about that for 40 minutes, and it was one of the better conversations I'd had in years. Tyler sat in the back seat and ate chips and looked quietly satisfied with how everything had turned out. I felt the same way. I thought about the man who had sat at a kitchen table in March holding divorce papers, trying to understand how 18 years could be handed back to you in an envelope. I thought about what that man had known and what he hadn't known yet. About the 12 acres. About the patent. About what he was capable of when nobody was pushing him toward it and nobody was watching. The work was always worth doing, even when nobody was watching. Some people spend their lives performing their value for an audience that still doesn't see it. I had spent 18 years doing that. I was done. I knew what I had built. I knew what I was worth. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that was completely enough. I used to think that being overlooked was the worst thing that could happen to a person. standing 6 feet away while the woman I'd spent 18 years building a life with described me to her colleague as basically a mechanic. That kind of thing leaves a mark. Not a loud mark. A quiet one. The kind you carry around for years without naming it. What I understand now is that being overlooked is only dangerous if you start to believe it yourself. Marcus never stopped believing in the work. He kept designing his tool in the garage on weekends. He kept walking that 12 acres along the creek. He kept doing the honest, unglamorous, invisible labor that nobody threw parties for. And when the moment came, not through revenge, not through scheming, but simply through continuing to be exactly who he was, everything that had been quietly accumulating was ready. That's the part I want you to sit with. Not the part where Nathan's project collapsed, or where Diana called with a different kind of voice than the one she used at that kitchen table. Those things matter, but they're not the point. The point is what happened in the years before any of that, the thousands of hours of work that nobody witnessed. The patent filed quietly. The land purchased without fanfare. The knowledge built without an audience. There is a kind of person who only works hard when someone is watching. Who only builds when they can show the progress. Who needs the validation to sustain the effort. I was that person for a long time, honestly. I kept hoping Diana would notice. I kept expecting the acknowledgement to come. When it didn't, I worked harder and hoped louder and waited longer. That was the mistake. Not the work itself, but the waiting. What Marcus learned, what I learned watching his story unfold, is that integrity is not a performance. Character is not something you demonstrate for an audience. The person you are when no one is looking is the only version of yourself that is actually real. And that version, the one shaped by daily discipline, honest effort, and the quiet courage to keep going without applause. That is the version of yourself that will be standing when everything else shifts. The choices Diana made came from a place of impatience. She wanted visible success. The kind that photographs well and gets mentioned in the business section. What she couldn't see, what people like Nathan Cole with their big SUVs and their funding rounds often can't see, is that the most durable things are built slowly, out of sight, by people who don't need to announce what they're doing. Every outcome in this story followed directly from the character of the people involved, not from luck, not from fate, from who they actually were, expressed consistently over time. Nathan built fast on borrowed foundations and collapsed. Marcus built quietly on solid ground and stood. That is not coincidence. That is simply cause and effect operating on a long enough timeline. If there is anything worth taking from Marcus's story, it is this. Do the work. Do it whether or not anyone sees it. Do it because it is yours to do and because you believe it matters. Build the thing. Protect what you love. Trust what you know. And trust that eventually, the world catches up to the truth of who you are. Even when, for a long time, it seems like it never will.